The blessing and curse of the 16 personalities. ESTPs and ESFPs. Their self-confidence. Self-confidence is dependent on a lot of things, and these two types can certainly be anxious in their disposition, just like anyone else. What I mean is that, at least in my experience and observations, both of these types feel like they can handle anything life throws at them. They have an "I'll figure this out" mindset. SE enjoys immediacy, with a preference for taking action and getting instantaneous results. It's about minimizing the time frame of impact. Based on this, unexpected developments don't feel anywhere near as bad as they do to other types. In fact, when these two types are forced to think about lots of variables far in advance, it can be very stressful. This is a blessing because it's liberating as far as mindsets go. It affords them the ability to stride through life, to open their proverbial front door and burst out into the world, ready to defend against the slings and arrows of life, whilst devouring the fun aspects of it. This is because they have that self-belief to rapidly change course, if need be, to not be overly attached to a preconceived plan or approach. It's hard to get them off balance, to throw them off. They're always somehow switched on, so to speak. The curse is that their confidence can spill into overconfidence, so they can take on challenges that are too much for them in an overly ambitious and aggressive way. Also, there are times where even a tiny moment of preparatory thinking would save an enormous amount of effort in the future. Both of these types can fall into the habit of getting into ridiculous, chaotic, and sticky situations. Because they know they can get themselves out of these situations really well, they don't spend much time trying to avoid them in the first place. ISTPs and INTPs. Their desire to make sense of things. I know. Is it really too much to ask for things to make sense? Well, yes it is, lots of the time. Both of these types are sense-making machines. This is particularly beautiful when they make sense of things that are seemingly ununderstandable or too complex to grapple with. These two types are the source of much intellectual triumph. Many things can be reduced to principles and formulas. Even though that might seem simplistic, it's surprisingly effective. In fixed systems, such as musical instruments, for example, it works perfectly, because these principles and formulas never need to change. In more fluid systems, there's a bigger variability, but they still work. For something to make sense or be true, it needs to be internally logically consistent and then, ideally, externally verifiable as well. These two types use those two metrics to guide them in life. Their curse is that this is not an exact science. To navigate life rationally means sacrificing living completely logically at times. You need to embrace the madness, the irrationality, to see the power and appeal of emotional escapades. Often people don't make sense, and that's not only fine, but in fact there's a lot of beauty in it. However, for these two types, that's not a fun thing to accept. The problem is not simply that people don't make sense, it's that they are inconsistent as well. Emotions just have too many variables acting upon them. Even when you have a person figured out, they still throw you many curveballs, be they intentional or not. Even though both of these types become well aware of this reality, it's still infinitely frustrating to them. Their desire to make sense of things drives them to understand the world in deep ways, but that causes issues when it comes to things or people being irrational and inconsistent. INFJs and INTJs. Their planning abilities. Their planning and predictive skill and ability to conceive of a vision, be that short or long term, is a massive source of power for these types. The over-the-top archetypical mold would be of them being puppet masters, people behind the curtain, pulling the strings, running secret empires from their basements, or, much more likely, just coming up with great ways of getting things done. Either in an innovative, systematic way that saves time and effort, INTJs, or in ways that maneuver around and account for people's sensitivities and preferences, INFJs. To demystify things a bit, these two types simply think about things a lot in advance. They'll imagine themselves doing the thing and try to preempt problems that might arise and try to solve them before they happen. If you are one of these two types, you might think, hang on, isn't that the common sense approach? Why on earth would you want to wait until problems happen when they can just be avoided? Well, there's many reasons why other types don't do this. The first is simply that other types don't get energy from being in their head. Sitting around pondering, speculating, and predicting is actively draining for them. Having to contend with a challenge or problem in real time is way more preferable because it's stimulating and energizing. It activates something within them that allows them to rise to the occasion, even if these are really mundane, day-to-day problems. Other reasons are simply that certain types find life to be much more fun when it's highly unpredictable or chaotic even. As I often say, it's not necessarily about skill level when it comes to the cognitive functions. It's more about preferences. INTJs and INFJs get a strong sense of psychological comfort from knowing in advance how things might or are likely to unfold. This becomes a curse when they leave too much adventure on the table. While the feeling of a perfectly conceived plan, unfolding like moves on a chessboard, is elegant and beautiful, so is being thrust into the unknown and overcoming it. Riding life's roller coaster a bit, just for its own sake. There's so much growth there for both of these types. It also removes discovery, stumbling across something unexpected and suddenly realizing that it's the missing piece for something important in your life. ENFJs and ESFJs. Knowing the best social path. It's rare that these two types will find themselves in situations where they are socially lost or out of their depth. More often than not, they'll know precisely what to do or the right combination of words to craft together to get the outcome they want. The benefits of this are obvious and plentiful. You could make the case that it's the best skill to have in life. It aids you in your career, in the worlds of dating and relationships, and simply with friendships as well. They can act as social lubricants and catalysts, coaxing people out of their shells and being the connective tissue between groups who would otherwise never be able to get along. It's a superpower. However, it presents a big dilemma that pops up time and time again. When you know the right thing to say, to spare people's feelings, to avoid friction, to mend and patch things up, when should you use it? Or perhaps more specifically, when should you not use it, and instead lean into disagreeableness and positive aggressiveness? Their ability to know the best social path can become a curse, since they actively have to lean away from it at times. It's like seeing the ideal way to get out of an unpleasant interaction and choosing not to take it, because that unpleasant interaction is also necessary. Essentially, it's eternally being presented with the easy path and always having to figure out when it's right or wrong to take it. ENTPs and ENFPs. Their boundless curiosity. The desire to know, to explore, and to experience is something that characterizes these types. It's not that they are the only ones who do this, of course, but instead that it's so overt with them that it's hard to miss. Their explorative nature comes across really obviously in conversation, either from them directly questioning you, someone else, something else, or just injecting in something unusual and unexpected, some out of left field insight or observation that swerves the conversation down a weird side street. One thing that often happens, especially in the modern age, is that one interesting topic or hobby can easily lead to another. This makes them interdisciplinarily, probably not a word, gifted. Being able to leverage the cross-pollination of ideas that comes from having a breadth of knowledge. It's a route to polymathery. Again, not a word. However, much in life feels stale to the curious mind. This is their curse. So much of life is hoisted up on pillars of repetition, familiarity, and mundanity. It can become brain-crushingly stultifying for these two types. Curiosity is inextricably tied to the new. Yes, you can find new ways to enjoy familiar things, and that's a great thing to do for these two types in terms of growth, but typically something needs to be very new. It needs to sparkle with the requisite freshness in order for these types to gravitate towards it. Thus begins the endless cycle of the new becoming the known, and them feeling restless, be that literally or just intellectually. So these types end up leapfrogging from one field to another, chasing that feeling, that high, that comes from starting off in a field pregnant with possibilities. Then there's the old adage of curiosity being very cat-killing at times. I do think both of these types can follow their curiosity into dangerous places at times as well. ENTJs and ESTJs. Mastering external metrics. How do you know when you're doing well in life? It's a big question, but one straightforward way to measure it is to, measure it. If, for example, you're a sports person, you can easily judge how you're doing by your win-loss record, and if that isn't reflective, then you can measure your personal in-game performance stats. You can track your progress and classify things concretely. When you hold yourself accountable to these external metrics, it's an excellent recipe for growth, progress, and achievement. That's often precisely why both of these types tend to excel in life. There's a clarity to their approach that many people lack. They know exactly where they stand or rank, and from that, what they need to do to improve. The curse of this is that it obscures the intangibles of life, which these types can neglect and discover far later down the line. It's those things that squeeze themselves through the gaps of life that you can't quantify in simplistic ways. These two types can overlook these things, instead basing their lives on what they can measure. This relates back to the need for efficiency and effectiveness as well. Speed, and to a lesser extent energy too, can be measured, so optimizing those things appeals greatly to them. But many babies can be thrown out with that bathwater, such as creating a faster way or system to do something that lots of people end up disliking, because it doesn't account for their individual ways of doing things. That search for the objective ideal discounts the subjective and more personal considerations. ISFPs and INFPs, their ability to romanticize and see beauty. One of the great gifts of both of these types is being able to illuminate and capture the beauty of life, and act as conduits for others getting in touch with that beauty as well. It's the archetype of someone who can take a mundane situation and portray it in a way that captures something deeper, more meaningful, or even just making it more aesthetically pleasing. It's also the kind of thing you see in observational comedy, that transformation of the mundane into the magical. It's a blessing because people sometimes need to be reminded of the fact that life can be viewed through this lens, and it is the source of much art and creativity in general, including in the realms of science, engineering, and so on. Sometimes, I think that descriptions of these types imply that the artistry needs to be literal, whereas it's more of a mindset. For example, scientists are often driven by their appreciation for the beauty of the natural world, or the elegance of a theory, or a complex idea expressed in a simple formula. Engineers similarly want to solve structural problems in a way they'd consider elegant, and not simply just practical. So this appreciation for beauty can pop up literally anywhere. It's a mindset, not an indication of a particular skill set or preferred career path. The curse of this is the fact that, well, the world is also a very ugly place, too. And sometimes you need to stare that in the face, quite brutally, before you can find anything redeeming to hold on to. I think that both of these types can see lots of darkness in the world as well, for this reason, and possibly they are affected much more by it as well, which is an intense combination to deal with. So this ability they have to romanticize things, by definition, means that they see the grim and bleak reality just as much, which can take a toll. ISFJs and ISTJs. Incremental mastery. In the book Atomic Habits, which I'm sure many of you have read, the author talks about the idea of making a 1% improvement every single day for a year. The punchline being that if you get 1% better each day for 1 year, you'll end up 37 times better by the time you're done. This style of learning is continuous and incremental, and it's the approach that both these types are exceptionally good at. Probably the best. Given enough space and time to figure things out, they can reach a masterful level of proficiency. Perhaps no other types can craft their own lives in precisely the way they want them. After a certain point, all aspects of their life will be taken under their command, if they can help it. That level of control and understanding that they reach is a deeply powerful thing, not least because their routines, habits, and insights eventually compound on top of each other, kind of like building a house from the ground up on consistently solid foundations. However, it can be a curse at times too. This natural preference they have for learning incrementally means that they sometimes leave rapid growth on the table. Sometimes it's better to explode in a burst of creative energy to unleash your potential and achieve a paradigm shift in your own life, where you push your own boundaries intensely. This alternative style of learning and achieving growth is also valid and necessary. Sometimes it can take these types too long to know when to pull this particular trigger. One thing that is both a blessing and a curse is the Love Who Discord server. Feel free to join us on there and figure out which of the two it is for you.